Greetings. We find ourselves in unusual times, but we're going to have to find ways to work through it together this semester. And I have confidence we will. I wanted to record this short video as a starting point, as a way to talk a little bit about what we're going to do, how the course is going to work this semester, and also to introduce myself. And following this will be some short videos in which the TAs introduce themselves as well. Of course, we do hope to meet most of you in person, at least sometimes this semester, but we wanted to start this way, given where we are right now, with a little brief video introduction. So I'll start by saying a little bit about myself, and then I'll get into how the course is going to work. So, my name's Todd Shank. I am a faculty member in the School of Public and International Affairs here at Virginia Tech, and my work really falls into two areas, and not by coincidence, those two areas reflect the two classes I'm teaching this semester. So one area is environmental policy and planning. And when it comes to environmental policy and planning, my research, my scholarship, my teaching, and at least in the past, my consulting, has been in a variety of different areas. So one issue that I've worked on a fair bit is climate adaptation. So what do we mean by that? Well, in my case, what we typically mean is how do cities, regions get together to make effective decisions on how people are going to adapt to a changing climate. Do we still want to stop climate change to the degree possible? Sure. But at some point, we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of climate change already baked in, and therefore we need to find ways to respond, to adapt. And that's what a part of my work focuses on. I also do some work on invasive species management. So how do we control species that are invasive, that may be, say, crowding out species that are really important to our ecosystems and our ecology. And so I do work on invasive species management. I do some work on nutrient pollution, freshwater management. And so right now, for example, I'm on a new project on something called freshwater salinization syndrome. So in other words, the salinization that's occurring in some freshwater bodies. So those of you from Northern Virginia, Fairfax area, I have a project right now that's actually with Fairfax Water and some other stakeholders in that area. We're looking at those issues. So that's the environmental policy and planning part of my background. The other thing that I tend to focus on in my work is what we call collaborative governance. And regardless of whether you're in EPP class or you're in the community involvement class, we're definitely going to cover that more this semester. What do we mean by collaborative governance? But to give you the sort of brief or short summary, when we talk about collaborative governance, what we mean is how do different folks get together to make the best decisions possible. Sometimes that means how do we get the folks from different agencies together around a problem that's shared. Sometimes it's how do we get people together from different levels of government to collaborate on trying to solve a problem or suite of problems. And sometimes it's how do we involve other stakeholders in those conversations, right? So acknowledging that not only are government officials, government experts part of solving problems, but that other stakeholders, whether those are, say, environmental groups, community groups, business groups, different stakeholders might have and should have a role in representing their interests, their concerns, their priorities as part of efforts to collaboratively solve problems, or at least explore how we can address problems. So often what I try to do in my work is pull those two things together. That is to say, how do we involve different stakeholders in conversations around major complex environmental challenges, and not just environmental, often environmental, social, and economic problems. How do we bring people together to try to tackle those? Acknowledging that they can be pretty messy, they can be pretty complex. We're often dealing with changing conditions, a lot of uncertainty, and so on and so forth. So a lot of reasons why it's really important to get multiple stakeholders together. So that's a little bit about my background. And of course, I hope that we'll talk more about these things as we go through this semester. So how about the course? How is it going to be structured? Well, the plan is that every week you will have 2 recorded lectures, or most weeks I should say, you'll have 2 recorded lectures. And the idea with those lectures is that I'll share some content with you that will complement the readings of the week, but of course the readings might cover slightly different topics, and that's on purpose, right? We're going to try to get at things, multiple different things through both of those avenues, the readings that are assigned to you and the videos that are recorded. Both of those, by the way, will be available through Canvas. So please do check Canvas regularly for what readings are assigned, and if they're not from textbook in the case of the EPP class, there might be some links to, for example, PDF documents there. And also the videos will be posted there. So please check Canvas for those 2 things. Then in addition to that, you're going to be expected to come once a week for a seminar type session. And so if you do the math, about a third of the class, roughly each time, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, will come to each of those classes, seminars. during our scheduled class time. And during those times, the idea is that you'll either do presentations to peers, that is to your group members and small groups within those small seminar sessions. You will do an exercise, and or we'll have some time for discussion, right? So those are going to be more interactive days. I know that some of you, I appreciate that some of you may not feel comfortable being in person right now, and or may physically not be here in Blacksburg. So what we're going to do is also have an online option. That online option will look very similar to what the in-person groups are doing. It will just be through Zoom and so on and so forth. So that's what we're going to do in terms of both having the asynchronous 2 lectures per week online, video recorded, and the once per week, for most of you at least, in person. I should note that after the Thanksgiving break, we're all going to be online, and you'll all be expected to attend all 3 sessions per week. I think it's 5 in total before we end for the winter break. And that's because we're going to be doing some things where we want to have everybody together for those. So everybody linking into Zoom together for that. So long and short is, please stay tuned. I think we've got a plan, but things are changing. We never know exactly how it's going to all work out. Please check Canvas for the most up-to-date information. Please reach out as you have questions, concerns, and we're going to get through it. So thanks for your time. Please stay tuned here. As I said, the TA videos are going to come right after this, and otherwise some other content for today. So looking forward to meeting you all, most of you in person as well. Bye-bye. Oh, and don't forget to wear a mask.
Hello everyone, my name is Aida. I'm second year PhD student in PGG program, which stands for Planning, Governance and Globalization here at VT. I'm doing research in the environmental planning field, especially how to mitigate extreme heat exposure in cities. My favorite activities are swimming and yoga, and I'm really excited to meet you all this semester.
My name is Anna Nagornyuk, and I'm going to be one of the TAs for Todd Shank's class this semester. I'm a second-year MERP student, and I'm studying urban and regional planning. My undergrad is also in urban planning, although I started out originally in architecture. My interests include economic and community development planning, land use policy, architecture, art, and mental health. I'm also involved in the Community Change Collaborative, the Graduate Urban Affairs and Planning Association at the Blacksburg campus. And in my free time, I like making art and hanging out with our pets. We have a dog and 2 cats here at home. And try to get outdoors as much as I can. It's nice to meet everybody.
Hello class, and welcome to another fall semester. My name is Melody Brown, and I'll be one of your TAs. I am a recent graduate of Virginia Tech in the Smart and Sustainable Cities major, and I'm also a current grad student in the Masters of Urban and Regional Planning program. My research and interests include community participation and development, as well as geospatial intelligence. And a fun fact about me is that I've lived in 7 southern states. So let's start the semester strong and go Hokies!
All right, now that we've introduced ourselves, I want to spend a few minutes here going through some of the particulars of the course for this semester. Let's start with learning objectives. So by the end of the semester, there's a few things we'd like you to be able to do. One is that you should be able to demonstrate knowledge of the basic principles and theories behind environmental policy and planning in practice. And those last 2 words, in practice, matter a lot. We don't want you just to be able to recall certain, regulations or laws or acts of Congress. More importantly, in many ways, we want you to be able to think about how they work in the real world. What does environmental policy and planning look like in practice? That being said, second objective, we do want you to have at least a broad strokes understanding of the existing federal, state, and local environmental policy and planning approaches. So we're not necessarily going to ask you to memorize a whole bunch of regulations, but you should have a general sense of what's out there and how different levels of government act on problems. Third objective there is you should be able to identify some key environmental problems and solving them. So as you'll see, the course is broken down into various topic areas: air quality, water quality and quantity, transportation, and so on and so forth. And we'd like you to think about what are the different ways in which some of those approaches, the approaches we find in different areas are similar, what are some ways in which they're different, and how do they interact with one another. On a very much related note is the objective that by the end of the semester you should be able to understand the roles and responsibilities not just of different agencies at different levels of government, but also of non-governmental actors in our environmental policy making and planning. What are the roles of non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations? What are the roles of international organizations? What are the roles of industry, either individually or as associations? How do each of these actors interact with government agencies and other actors and with each other in tackling our environmental issues? Next is to demonstrate the ability to apply the knowledge gained in this class to critically analyze and discuss policy and planning responses to emerging environmental problems. As you'll see, environmental problems are rarely static in nature. Conditions are often changing, they're often typified by high degrees of uncertainty, and therefore we want you to leave not just with an understanding of the specific examples or even topic areas we talk about this semester, but rather to have a sense of how you might take what you learn here and apply it in various domains to emerging challenges and as conditions change. And last but not least, you should be able to critically examine the intersections of environmental, social, and economic issues through the sustainability lens. As we'll talk about, sustainability is a key point of departure in how I approach this course. Why? Because environmental problems are rarely just environmental in nature. They interact intimately with social problems, with economic problems, and therefore we need to think about them together. But more on that later. So, next, the part you've all been waiting for, assignments and how you'll be evaluated. So there's a few things that we're going to take into account and use for grading purposes this semester. First of all, a case presentation. You're going to be responsible for making a presentation to peers in your respective seminar groups on a specific topic. And so, for example, you might do a case presentation on air quality, and you should find a case out there that is exemplar of issues in air quality, and talk about why it's a problem, and perhaps what different stakeholders are doing to address that problem. Next is class quizzes. Each week, we're going to have a quiz. The quizzes will be based on the readings and, of course, these pre-recorded lectures. So, by Sunday evening or late afternoon, you'll be expected to have completed the quiz for that week. And note that that's 25% of your grade, so it's a fairly significant chunk. Next is the Green RFP. This one's always a lot of fun. Our friends in the VT Office of Sustainability run this yearly Green RFP program through which students can pitch ways in which you would make VT a more sustainable place. We've had great success in the past with the class submitting proposals to this program, and we look forward to a repeat of that this year. So instructions to follow, but the general idea is that you research something that you could do, something from recommending solar panels in some place or a refillable water station. You do some research on what it would cost, what are the benefits, in other words, what is the return on investment, for example, would be one way of assessing that. And you submit this to the Office of, or we submit on your behalf rather, this to the Office of Sustainability. As I said, I think that's always a neat assignment. Next is the Mercury Game reflection paper. We're going to finish the semester with a game. This year is going to be a little bit different because we're all going to be remote after Thanksgiving, but you're going to be expected to attend all of the classes after the break. I believe it's 5 classes, and for 3 of those, you're going to be engaging in a role-play simulation. You're going to take on the role of a country or an organization that's negotiating around how mercury will be regulated internationally. This one's also always a lot of fun, and I really look forward to both watching you all engage, take on your roles, and engage in the negotiation, and then of course to reading your reflection papers, and that's where the grade comes from, is the reflection paper that you will write after the experience. And then last but not least is participation in some mini assignments we'll throw in throughout the semester. I normally would take attendance in this course, but given all going on, I'm really reticent to this year. However, that doesn't mean that you're not expected to attend the seminar sessions, whether you're in a face-to-face or online group. And in fact, you're motivated to do so by this part of your grade. While we won't take strict attendance each class, the TAs and I will be watching who's there. There will be some peer evaluation component to the semester. And as I said, there'll be some mini assignments, many of which require that you are there to participate in them. So a little bit of motivation there, but we hope you're motivated anyway. Typically, the seminar sessions, I think, are among the most fun and probably informative part of the course, when you get a chance to present to others, discuss things with others, and just generally interact. As I noted in my earlier message to you all, we do have a textbook in this course. It's Daniel's The Environmental Planning Handbook for Sustainable Communities and Regions. It's available through various channels, both hard copy and digital, and we may actually end up having a digital copy available through VT libraries because of the issues we're having right now with reserve items. So stay tuned on that, please. I should note to also please pay attention to Canvas, as we will have some supplementary readings from other sources. In general, please visit the quote-unquote pages part of the Canvas site, where I'll post a weekly page that points you towards the readings. Obviously, we'll have lectures like this posted there, links to them, and also we'll point towards some small assignments and quizzes and so on, so that you can link through to those from there. In general, please just check Canvas on a regular basis, because that's really the syllabus, the living syllabus for this course that we want to use throughout the semester. Okay, so I want to change gears here a little bit for a moment and spend some time on some more substantive topics that are important for this week. And as I said, in addition to this and the second video I'll be posting later, there are also, of course, other readings that are available online through Canvas for this week. So the first thing is values and perspectives, and it might seem a bit strange. Why are we talking about values and perspectives in an environmental policy and planning course? Well, I think that values and perspectives are critically important to understanding the ways in which we regulate our environment, the decisions we make vis-a-vis our environment, whether at a collective or individual level, or that we fail to make, frankly. It's by understanding the values of different stakeholders, different actors, that we start to understand the ways in which we act in our environment, the ways in which we act upon our environment, and the ways in which we either do in practice or propose different regulatory or other solutions to environmental problems. But what are values? Well, as it says here, dictionary definition is person's principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what is important in life. And perhaps the synonyms here say a little bit more. When we think about values, what we're often thinking about are principles, more specifically our moral principles, our ethics, our moral code, our standards, our moral standards, our codes of behavior. So the values are the things that we hold close, the ways we define ourselves, that, at least in theory, we would like to think that we translate into practice. Now, we'll talk a little bit more later, of course, and throughout the semester about the ways in which values and actions don't necessarily align. But at the very least, it's helpful to think about what are our values and how do they inform the ways we think about environmental problems. And just to tee it up a little bit more, when we come into the seminar sessions this week, we're going to interrogate our values. We're going to think about what are our values and how do they relate to environment. You're going to do that in a couple of different small group settings within your seminars, so be ready for that. When we talk about perspectives, it's pretty clear that they're informed by our values, but not necessarily the same thing. Our perspectives are more how we view any given situation in light of the values we hold, or at least in part in light of the values we hold. It's the sense of what is right or wrong, unfair or fair, more or less important in any given context. And as I said, they're shaped by our values, but also by our interests and priorities, which are often situational and not necessarily totally related to our values. So a second topic or concept I'd like to briefly introduce here in this first video is sustainability. As I mentioned already, sustainability is a critically important part of this course. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that sustainability undergirds many of the ways in which we're going to talk about issues. And I'm willing to bet that most, probably all of you, have heard of sustainability before. Probably you've seen this definition or one like it, and many of you have probably seen a diagram like the one on the left, if not the one on the right. But I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what we mean by sustainability. So the definition here is a pretty well-known one, probably the most famous definition of sustainability, and one of the first. Came from the Brundtland Commission's report back in 1987, and they defined sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Think about that for a moment. So what we want is vibrant, livelihoods. We want people to be able to sustain themselves with a certain level of comfort and so on. Today, everyone today, that is everyone on the planet today, but to do that in such a way that future generations are also able to do the same thing. That's a pretty tall order, but I think it's a concept, an idea worth fighting for myself. Typically, when we talk about sustainability, we think about these three pillars if we look at that diagram on the left. So obviously, we're an environmental planning and policy course. We're probably going to pay more attention, if we're honest about it, to that first pillar. But the others are equally important when we think about how we build a sustainable world. I'm willing to bet most of you would agree with me that the social sphere is equally important, that we want to be thinking about social equity, we want to be thinking about, again, quality of livelihoods, health, education, all those things that we value as humans. And last but not least is the economy. Even back in 1987, the Brundtland report implicitly, if not explicitly, identified that many of us live in worlds in which we have markets, in which we depend on economic systems for exchange and so on and so forth. And of course, we'll talk about the ways in which the economic system interplays with the environmental and social systems. I personally prefer the diagram on the right. You might say, well, it's the same thing. It's got three circles. But there's a important theme or idea embedded within nesting these circles. And what it is that our society exists on an environmental foundation. That is to say, we can't have a healthy, vibrant society if we don't have a healthy, vibrant environment. And so we need to think about the environment as the foundation upon which we build a healthy, functioning society, or societies, plural. And then within society, our economic systems, our means of exchange, our means of distributing goods, and so on and so forth, are really critical ways in which we deal with issues of exchange and so on. And so that's a system within our society, or set of systems within our societies that are important, but that they function and operate within societies and really are at the service of those societies. You may disagree with me, by the way, and certainly we welcome those conversations. Normally in class we would have a discussion around this, but given the weird place we are this semester, I'm just sharing with you a little bit around what sustainability is in my perspective. But as I said, yours may differ. So there are some key concepts that we want to introduce here that relate to sustainability, and this is in no way exhaustive, and nor is it all of the list of all of the concepts we're going to cover this semester, but I just want to get a few out of the way, a few foundational concepts. So first of all is this notion of carrying capacity. Carrying capacity suggests that in order to be sustainable over the long term, we need to understand that there is a limit. In other words, there is an amount of resource in any given area that can be extracted. There's an amount of fresh water, there's an amount of clean air, there's an amount of the minerals, the non-renewable resources that we use. And that at some capacity level, some level of consumption, we cross a threshold where we're no longer sustainable because we're using those resources more than they can reasonably be replenished or substituted with something else in the case of non-renewable resources. We could also talk about a similar carrying capacity of waste, by the way, so an absorption capacity, which is also a form of a carrying capacity. If we're producing too much pollution, again, we find ourselves out of that sustainable balance. The next notion there is no free lunch, and really in a way that's important for us to think about is that there are costs and benefits, trade-offs with any decisions we make, right? That there are often times we forget about what we call externalities, so that is the things that are produced, the pollution produced, the loss of resources over time, and that we don't have to think about them because they're not well incorporated into, for example, the cost of a product. But we want to be keeping that concept alive here, that there is no such thing as a free lunch. Next concept is interconnected systems. I want to encourage you to take a systems perspective as we go throughout the semester. I'm certainly going to try my best to encourage that kind of thinking. That is to say that any given environmental problem is not in a vacuum, right? It interplays with a series of other problems, whether they're social in nature, whether they're economic in nature, whether there are other environmental problems. But it's to say that we live in a systems world where things are interconnected. And that can be challenging. That makes it tough. How do we regulate something when we don't have a full sense of the consequences, perhaps unintended consequences, in other domains? And so we want to be keeping that in mind and try to take a holistic view as we look at issues throughout the semester. And last but not least is the precautionary principle. Precautionary principle has been actually enshrined in law in some places, like the European Union, and we'll come back to that. But essentially what it suggests is that we shouldn't make choices, for example, around how we regulate something that's potentially dangerous from a perspective of we assume it's safe until we learn otherwise, and then, for example, ban it retroactively, but rather that we should take the attitude that unless we know something is safe, we will be precautionary and we will avoid it. And as I said, it's been enshrined in places like Europe when we think about things like GMOs, for example. And there's a fundamental difference in the ways in which a precautionary approach plays out in different regulatory environments. And again, we'll come back to that. But for now, suffice to say that it's about being precautious rather than reactive in environmental policy and planning. So that's sustainability, and we're certainly going to come back to that on a recurring basis throughout the semester. So last thing I'd like to do here is tee up the other two videos you're supposed to watch for this first quote-unquote video segment of the course. So if you do the math, this video is about 30 minutes, a little under 30 minutes. And so what I want you to spend the rest of the 50-minute, normally what would be a lecture, doing is watching these two videos. And they're both, I hope you'll find interesting and informative. The first one is about Love Canal. So we're going back over 40 years to a situation, a tragic situation in upstate New York in the Niagara Falls area, close to Buffalo. And as you'll see, it's as I said, a tragic case. What I want you to be thinking about is what was learned from that? What's changed? Perhaps what remains the same based on what you know about current situations and current environmental policy and planning. And of course, in general, what can we learn from the Love Canal case about how we can and should approach environmental policy and planning? What are your big takeaways? If we were in the classroom, we would watch this in person together and we would discuss it. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of a chance to share back some of your reflection on it, but you're going to have to watch it on your own here, and what I'd like you to do instead is just keep these questions in mind as you do watch. And again, this is a required part of the course, so please we'll make sure you watch that video. The second video I'd like you to watch is even shorter, but no less important. It starts to get at something I want to make sure we pay attention to this semester in light of Black Lives Matter and, in general, the racial and social justice issues that we are confronting and have to confront these days. Environmental racism has certainly been a critical part of the patterns we've seen of discrimination over time. We know that communities of color, for example, are disproportionately exposed to environmental hazards and risks. And so this video is designed to, or intended to get you thinking about that. And so I'd like you to watch it. And as with the first video, as with the Love Canal video, in this case, I've given you a few questions to reflect on here. So I want you to be thinking about how do environmental problems intersect with social problems and inequalities? Again, what are those relationships? Where do they come from? What are some of the opportunities and challenges associated with trying to address these issues concurrently? And I want you to think about that. That second question is not obvious from the video, or the answer to it. That's where I want to invite you to do some thinking. So with that, happy watching of those two videos, and I look forward to engaging with you throughout the semester.